Welcome back. I'm happy to announce that in this lesson we're back in the PHP. Get your workspace ready and let's make some table classes. This is where we really start turning our Hello World component into something useful. First of all, we need to create a new folder for any table classes that the component is going to use. We call that folder Tables, and we put it directly under the component folder. Next, we're going to add a file to connect with our messages table that we created in the last lesson. Remember when we looked at the MVC, the files and classes had related names. Well, it's the same for tables. Generally, we name a table in the plural form. In our cases, that was Jo's hello messages. However, for the table class, we generally use the singular form because we only ever use the class on one record at a time. So, the file is going to be called message.php. Because we've added a new folder, we'll just grab an existing index.html file and copy it in. Now, let's go into the file and create the PHP header as we've done in all the other lessons. Once you've done that, find the snippet for basic table class and we'll have a look at that form. So, for a basic table, we add the package and the sub-package for the doc block as normal. Then we add the component name, in proper case, hello with a capital H. The table should be the same name as the file name in proper case, but without the PHP. That will give us a class name of hello table message. Finally, we need to give the class the actual name of the database table that the data comes from. We just need to fill in the name of the table without the JOS_database prefix. There's also an opportunity for you to change the name of the primary key of the table if it's different from ID. Insert that snippet and we'll have a look at what we've got. If you're familiar with Joomla 1.5, the first thing you will notice is that there are no field variables defined as properties anymore. In Joomla 1.6, the parent JTable class looks them up for you. So instead of spending lots of time typing them out, we can just jump straight into the constructor. The constructor simply calls the parent class constructor, but in doing so, it defines the name of the database table and the name of the primary key of the table. Do you notice something funny about the table name? It starts with a #__ string. That's actually a shortcut that Joomla replaces with the database prefix defined in your Joomla configuration file. You don't have to worry about including that manually every time you use a table class or build a query. Slide down to the bind method. The bind method is used to load data from a form into the JTable class, usually so that we can save it to the database. We are overriding this method to account for the params field. Usually the data for the params field comes from a web form in an array. If it does, we need to convert that to JSON format. If it's an array, we load it into a class called JRegistry and then convert that value into a string. PHP 5 has some pretty funky magic methods for converting classes to strings, and for JRegistry, when you convert it to a string, it assumes you want that string in JSON format. After we've done that, we pass the incoming data back to the parent method to suck in the class properties. Now, just move down to the check method. This method is usually called after you've called bind, but before you save the data to the database. It checks that the incoming data is okay to be saved. In our case here, we're just adding some code to ensure that the user has supplied a title. Finally, slide down to the store method. This is a method that either inserts a new record into the database or updates an existing one. What we want to do in this method, before we hand off to the parent, is one of two things. If this is a new record, we want to set the user ID for who is creating it and set the time. But if it's an existing record, we want to set the user ID for who is modifying it and the time. Both the current user ID and the time are constant, so we can find those first. Let's look at how we get the date first. Joomla has a date handling class called JDate. We could create a new JDate object if we wanted to, but a better way is to use a factory method to get it. JFactory, as we've seen in previous lessons, is a class you will use a lot to get other system objects, and one of its methods is called getDate. Note that JFactory is not an object, so you call its method statically using the : operator. By calling the getDate method, the time zone is automatically set for you, and it also handles non-Gregorian calendars that might be set for a specific language. JDate has a method for returning a date in MySQL format, so we use chaining to get the date in MySQL format all in one operation. One thing to note here is that the date returned will be in universal time, or UTC, or it's also called GMT. We almost always store dates in UTC so that people looking at data in different time zones will see the correct local time. Next, how do we get the user ID? Well, as we've seen before, JFactory also has a getUser method, which will return an object representing the current logged-in user. The object is actually an instance of the JUser class, and this has properties about the user we can access using its get method. The property we want is the ID, so we just pass that field name to the get method. Next, we do a simple check for whether this is a new record or an existing record. If it's a new record, we set the created time and the user ID with the variables we've already assigned. If it's a new record, we set the created time and user ID with the variables we've already assigned. If it's an existing record, then we update the modified time and user ID. Finally, we let the parent store method handle the actual database calls required for saving the record. That's all we need to do to get our data saving at the most basic level, and that concludes this block of lessons. We'll now move into creating the list and edit form views that allow the user to interact with the data. See you back soon.